Chapter 5. When the Reader Wrote. One time, a student who was studying to become an elementary school teacher asked me, "When you were little, did you want to be a teacher when you grew up?" Me? Oh, no, I replied, no. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be an astronaut, but these, I pointed to my high prescription strength glasses, put an end to that. But I found something else that was much, much better. What was that? Another student asked. A writer. In the summer of 1982, my family's last day on Guam was spent at a hotel. Our friends threw us one last party, a goodbye party, at the hotel pool. We kids swam until it got dark, and then the party ended. All of our friends, our little village of people who were like family, went home, and my family headed back up to our hotel room. We were leaving in early June in order to have a month to visit family, first in the Philippines and then California, before we made the long drive from San Diego to Grand Prairie, Texas. My siblings, tired out, went to bed early, but I couldn't get to sleep. I was too excited, too anxious. I stayed up watching 2 cable-provided movies on the hotel TV with Mom and Pa. Somewhere at the end of the second movie, Mom and Pa broke the news. Pa said, "You'll have to stay a few more days in Guam with Auntie Tess and Uncle Carl." I stared at both of them, the movie muted in the background. Why? Your papers weren't in order yet. It will take just 3 more days and it will be all right." But, I asked, why weren't my papers in order yet? I had no idea what my papers meant. I just knew that it sounded bad. "Ay nako," Mom said. "Your passport needs to be updated because you're adopted." Then, for the first time, she showed me my passport. It was green. It was a Taiwanese passport with a black and white toddler picture in it. My name was printed as Wang Sufong, also known as Rosel Ramos. Since only Pa was an American citizen at the time, and I was born to a single Taiwanese national, my citizenship was still mishmashed with Taiwan. It also didn't help that my only international official papers had a typo in it. I couldn't think of anything to say. "We adopted you when you were a baby," Mom said, sounding guilty, "but you will always be our daughter." "I will always be your Pa, and your mom will always be your mom," Pa added. "We will always love you," Mom said. "But," Pa declared with reluctance, "not everyone in the Philippines knew you were adopted." "Just keep this quiet, okay?" Mom said. I stared at them as that movie finished in the background. "Okay, Mom. Okay, Pa." "You're a good girl," Mom said. She turned off the TV. "You'll be okay," Pa said. "One of your uncles will be your official guardian on the airplane ride to the Philippines. See, here's the affidavit." Pa showed me a signed and notarized letter as proof. "We'll pick you up at the airport," Mom said. "You're lucky. You'll be flying on a nice Pan Am airplane where we go by military transport plane." "Okay, Mom." Then we all got ready for bed, and Mom and Pa went to sleep. I didn't. Oh, and the 2 movies that were shown that night? The first one was Chariots of Fire. The second was Mommy Dearest. I truly wish that I was making that up. To say that my 10-year-old self had abandonment issues would be an understatement. Thanks to the Childcraft book Guide to Parents, I was familiar with adoption, so I knew that my biological parents gave me up. As my family, are they my family? I thought back then, went to the airport, leaving me behind. I went with Auntie Tess and Uncle Carl to spend 2 nights and 3 days at their house. Absolutely speaking, Auntie and Uncle, who were actually not related to Mom and Pa but were their close friends, were as familiar and warm to me as my own family. Their 2 daughters were fun and friendly playmates, and their house was large, airy, and open to me. During the day around them, I smiled, played, and thanked their kind company. During the night, as they slept, I fought with the double demons of fear and grief. After the second day, when I woke up to the 3rd morning after a fitful night of not sleeping, I was ready to leave. The entire family came with me to the airport and made sure my legal guardian, a man whom Pa said I should consider as uncle, even though he was a complete stranger to me, met me at the departure gate. This was the days before 9/11, so Auntie, Uncle, and their daughters came with me through security all the way to my departure gate. I only had a carry-on, as my other luggage was with Mom and Pa in the Philippines. After I said my goodbyes, realizing that I would likely never see them again, I followed my guardian onto the jetway and then onto the plane. The white and blue of Pan American World Airways were everywhere in the cabin. I sat in a window seat, my carry-on tucked in front of me. My guardian sat next to me in an aisle seat. Try as I might, I cannot recall what my guardian looked like, not even his ethnicity. My insomnia, fear, and grief knocked out the image of this man who had full legal responsibility for me during the time I was in his care. As the plane lifted off for the long 3-hour flight to Manila International Airport, I stared out the window and saw the earth fall below me. From above, I saw the funny, crooked shape of what had been my little island home and felt keenly the loss of that childhood on Guam. As I stared at the vast blue ocean stretched before me, I felt the loss of my family and my friends. But most of all, I felt the loss of my innocence. For the first time of my life, I felt totally alone. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't, not on a plane with a bunch of strangers, which included the one sitting next to me. Instead, I looked at the seat pocket in front of me and, behind a safety brochure in a barf bag, was a slim magazine. Pulling it out, I saw that it was a copy of Cricket, an illustrated literary magazine for older kids. I absent-mindedly flipped through the pages until I stopped at a little black and white illustration of a fawn and a little pigtailed girl. They walked together under the same umbrella. I read. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. Those were the first words of the Chronicles of Narnia from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that I ever read. I barely remember the 3 days I spent before that flight. I don't remember my guardian at all. I also don't remember what happened when I arrived safe and sound at Manila International Airport when my family and extended family met me at the gate. Instead, I remember when I met Lucy Pevensey and Mr. Tumnus for the first time through the pages of Cricket magazine on an airplane several thousand feet above the deep, dark Pacific Ocean. Lucy meeting Mr. Tumnus made me forget my own troubles, and I became aware of the palliative power of story and the author behind the story, C.S. Lewis. After reading the book excerpt, which ended with, "And so Lucy found herself walking through the wood arm in arm with this strange creature as if they had known one another all their lives," I found myself again. Lewis reminded me of one unshakable truth about who I was. I was a reader. For the next 2 years, I often felt like Lucy, who stumbled into a strange new world and figured out how to adapt and fit in while she was there. After a long bus ride from the crazy throng of Metro Manila to San Fernando La Union, up north, we arrived at Pa's childhood home among the close-quartered houses on Bonifacio Street. For the first week of June, my family and I stayed there, a narrow 2-story wooden house with electricity throughout but no air conditioning. Since the only indoor running water was in the kitchen, the toilet was basically an attached outhouse on the first floor. Even though we had regularly visited this same house when we lived in Taiwan, I had no memory of that to prepare me for this visit. The weather was so hot and steamy that I developed prickly heat rashes on the inner bend of my elbows and the back of my knees. My siblings and I slept upstairs in one of the bedrooms on top of the blankets with a fan constantly on us. Since the nearest and only McDonald's to us was in Manila, it was 1982 after all, my brother Eric, who was 5 years old at the time, had to get used to eating adobo chicken whenever he whined for chicken nuggets. As my family's books were on a transport ship en route to the States, and I didn't find any books in English in my grandparents' house, my grandparents chided Mom and Pa for not raising their kids bilingual. I didn't read much when we were in the Philippines. However, we had plenty to do. The house of my Apong Baket, grandmother, and Apong Lakay, grandfather, had a black sandy beach as its backyard, and we all swam in the warm waters of the South China Sea. Afterwards, we bathed outside in our swimming suits, using cake soap and cold water hand pumped from the community water pump. We visited our relatives' homes, and there was always a huge fiesta with the familiar massive amount of food, drinking, singing, and playing at each house we would visit. We sightseed at nearby Baguio, a town sprawled around the misty green mountain ranges of the area. After a while, it all became a blur. One of my 20-something-year-old cousins took me to a wedding reception that she had been invited to. The only concrete memory I have of that reception was a piñata that was filled with little candies and little postage stamp-sized cards with a tiny bauble glued to it and a fortune cookie-type saying printed in English underneath the bauble. The one I got, and still have, had a plaster gold-painted clown face, and the fortune was, "A little boy will be your first pride and joy." While strange for a 10-year-old kid to get, it was a wedding reception after all. I always think of this bauble whenever my son drives me crazy, by the way. After a week, we took the long bus ride to Metro Manila. Mom then decided that I needed to get my hair cut before we flew out to the States. While one of my cousins who worked in Manila acted as a tour guide to Pa and my siblings, Mom took me to a hair salon. I tried not to stare in the mirror as an overly flamboyant, skinny young man in a halter top and short shorts washed, cut, and styled my hair. After Mom paid and we left the salon, I asked, "Mom, why does that man look like that?" Mom shrugged and murmured, "He's bakla." She waved her hand. "What's bakla?" "Ay, nako," Mom sighed. "It's a man who wants to be a woman." "But why? Watch where you're going!" Mom said as she pulled me back as an errant jeepney, a gaudily decorated public bus in which riders entered in the back through an open entryway, careened to a stop in front of us. We got into the jeepney. Mom called out where to go and sat on one of the pairs of bench seats that ran along the whole length of the bus. I sat next to her and then noticed that an old, crazy-eyed woman with blue-gray hair who sat across from me was grinning at me with no teeth and tobacco-stained gums. My first bakla, my first crazy old lady. That was when I realized that some things in real life can be much stranger than anything in a book. I haven't been to the Philippines since then, and I can still see them in my mind. Like the last time we were in California 5 years ago, my family visited our various far-flung relatives in the Los Angeles, San Jose, and San Diego areas. I again slept in other people's homes, met relatives that I struggled to remember, smiled dumbly as they talked to me in Ilocano or Tagalog, and sweated in a rental car during the hot California days. It almost became routine. A few of those relatives seemed as if they barely tolerated us, a rather large family of 6 ascending on them like locusts. But most were like the family-like community in Guam, and I was reluctant to leave when it was time to go. After we traveled all over California for most of the month of June, we spent our last night in San Diego. All that time, I hadn't read anything. But when I couldn't sleep, I looked around the bedroom that I shared with Wendy and found a copy of Reader's Digest. The only article I remember was this maudlin, based on a true story account of a 12-year-old girl who became pregnant with her very first boyfriend, a 13-year-old boy at her school. Her scandalized parents shipped her off to a group home for pregnant teen girls until she gave birth. The staff of that group home then took away her baby to be put up for adoption. The girl returned home, but she had to keep secret her past pregnancy and everything that happened to her in the previous months. In the wee hours of the early morning, this story horrified yet fascinated me. Here was a girl who was only 2 years older than I was. The idea that a kid had a kid was inconceivable to me, and even I recognized that she didn't have the wherewithal to take care of a baby. Giving up the baby for adoption was the right thing to do. However, still reeling from my own adoption revelation, I also felt angry. I was angry at the girl who got into this problem in the first place, and the parents who pressured her to make the problem go away, as if the pregnancy and birth never happened. "Ugh," I whispered, and put the magazine away. This was not the best way to prepare for a long family road trip and a new life in Texas. I missed my books, and regretted that my cousins didn't have cricket lying around. By this time, our station wagon had arrived in the States, so that was our road trip car. It was the South Carolina road trip in reverse, except we would be stopping halfway through the United States. My family left San Diego not too soon after I finished reading the article, The Morning Still Dark and Surprisingly Chilly. Pa decided to drive straight through from California to Texas, only stopping for gas, restroom breaks, and gas station provisions like food and water. I was wonky with sleep, so I barely remember the marathon trip except that I threw up somewhere on the Sonoran Desert in Arizona when I got car sick and Pa stopped for gas. When we entered Texas at El Paso, I thought, "We're in Texas," but then discovered just how big Texas was when I asked, "How far are we to Dallas?" Pa laughed. "We're only halfway there." From the front seat, Mom groaned. When we arrived in Grand Prairie, Texas, a suburb of Dallas, we couldn't move right into our house. First, our stuff hadn't arrived from Guam yet. Second, since there was no family military housing and my parents didn't want to rent, my parents bought their first home, a 1-story, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, Fox and Jacobs brick house with a 2-car garage in the back. When we visited our new house, it felt huge to me as my siblings and I ran from one empty room to the next. However, hideous burnt orange shag carpet was in every room, and Mom wanted it replaced. Fortunately, through family and Navy connections, we stayed with a Navy family for a few days and then a local Filipino family for a few days more. When we finally moved into our house, Wendy and I shared a room, little Eric and Cheryl shared another. Our house felt both familiar and foreign. It was familiar with our stuff, but it felt distinctly foreign. It was a civilian house in a civilian neighborhood, as far away from the Navy and Guamanian community as could possibly be. While Pa reported for duty at NAS Dallas, Mom, my siblings, and I adjusted to our new life in Texas. My first Texas summer was an awful culture and climate shock. The outside was like an oven on preheat. I discovered the hard way just how painful fire ant bites were. Only closed-toe shoes outside from now on. I saw no kids playing outside at all, even though there was a middle school and an adjacent park just across the street from my house. It was just too hot. The greatest culture shock was when I started 5th grade at my new school, Dickinson Elementary School. The school was only a 15-minute walk from the house, but Mom chose to drive Wendy, Eric, who started half-day morning kindergarten, and me to the school. When I found my homeroom classroom, Mr. Gilmore's 5th grade class, I was the last one to arrive and also the only new kid in class. For that first day, Mr. Gilmore arranged the desks so that the girls sat in one side of the room and the boys on the other, with their names labeled on the desks. I quickly realized that, 1, my name was unusual for a girl, and 2, my new teacher didn't read his student information roll too closely because, 3, my desk was in the boys' side. After that, I don't remember much about my first day in 5th grade, but by the end of 5th grade, I had gotten over my culture shock. I wore jeans. I got my first pair of jeans sometime after that first day, and wore layers in the fall and winter. I didn't know that Texas did get cold until it did. I had only one recess. New PD had 3, one before class, one after lunch, and one before the end of the day. Finally, I got used to being one of the few brown people in a sunburned sea of white people, although it took a while. I never realized that I was a minority until I moved to Texas. I never realized that a Filipino was a rare minority among minorities until I moved to Texas. But even more importantly, I never realized that military kids were a quirky bunch compared to civilian ones until I moved to Texas. Fortunately, because I was tested as gifted and talented when I was on Guam, which I didn't know until Mr. Gilmore informed me, I had that label in my school record when I was assigned my reading teacher. The 5th grade advanced reading teacher, Mr. Smith, recognized that I regularly finished my reading assignments far earlier than everyone else. So he lent me a young adult novel that 5th graders weren't supposedly mature enough to read yet, but he trusted that I was ready. While I liked the book overall, it was Judy Blume's Tiger Eyes. The story itself was a little too close to my own emotional issues. I didn't read another YA problem novel until middle school, which leads me to 6th grade. 6th grade at Truman Middle School was yet another culture shock to get over. I had to adjust to 7 classes, lockers with combination locks, hauling backpacks when the next class was too far away, gender-segregated PE, and puberty films that prepared the girls for menstruation. I had no idea what the boys' version was back then. In response to this culture shock, I watched an early morning anime cartoon called Star Blazers by the First Bell, which I heard clear across the street from my house, completed all of my assignments, checked out a library book to occupy myself when I finished classwork early, usually teen girl-centric novels like Judy Blume's Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and Beverly Cleary's 15. I spoke very seldom and hurried across the street to my house at the last bell. Not surprisingly, this did very little for my social life. However, I managed to make a friend, her name was Jill, during this time, which was a miracle to me. Also during this time, I carried around a 70-sheet spiral wide-ruled paper notebook with a number 2 pencil tucked in its spine, along with my usual Trapper Keeper binder and textbooks. At first, I just drew doodles and little word balloons and captions, just like my little kid Jito is fun days. I even drew the covers of imaginary books, sort of like a big kid version of an imaginary friend. But one day, those words became sentences and paragraphs, and I found myself writing a story. The title was Dana Strikes Back. While one would assume that I wrote about being adopted, I didn't. My adoption was still a within-the-family-only secret thing, and since only 2 years had passed when I found out, I still hadn't figured out what it meant to be adopted just yet. I could have written about my amazing time in Guam or the travels I did as a Navy kid, but I didn't. I didn't want to write anything about that, maybe because all that was just too weird and different from what everyone at school was like, and at age 11, I just wanted to fit in. So, I wrote a made-up story about a big sister who resented having to be the good, responsible one in her family, while her siblings seemed to have it easy. Dana was 11 years old, she read a lot, she lived in the suburbs but didn't know her neighbors too well, and she wished she didn't have to wear ugly glasses. In other words, Dana stood in for me. I hadn't heard of the writer's advice, write what you know, at the time, but that's what I did. However, because she was made up, she did things that I wanted to do but was too scared to do in real life, like talk to boys without breaking into a nervous flop sweat. I wrote in preteen girl cursive on every blue line, kept within the red line margins, and filled out both front and back of each sheet of that spiral notebook. I wrote in class before the bell rung and when I was finished early with my classwork. I wrote during lunchtime when Jill, who was as introverted as I was absent, and I didn't feel like making small talk with anyone else. I wrote during free days in PE. I wrote when I didn't have homework or when I finished homework early. I wrote when I was in my bedroom on top of the new bunk bed I shared with Wendy, when dinners were eaten and chores were done. When school was out for the holidays, I wrote. When I wasn't babysitting my siblings or neighbors' little kids for money over the weekend, gigs that my ever-entrepreneurial mom had set up, I wrote. I wrote all the time. That got the attention of another girl who mostly sat by herself at lunchtime. One day she asked, "What are you doing?" "Huh? Oh, I'm writing a book." "Really? That's so cool." She moved closer to where I sat. "What's it about?" It's about a girl having bratty younger brothers and sisters and being sick and tired of it." "Oh," she said. She thought a bit. "Can I read it?" "It's not done." "Can I read it when it's done?" Then Jill came over with her lunch tray. "Sorry for being late. Hey, who are you?" she said to the new girl. "I'm Stephanie." "Jill." I looked at both girls. As new a friend Jill was, she knew me enough. "You want to keep writing through lunch, do you?" "I'm sorry." "Nah, don't worry," she said as she sat her tray next to me and across from Stephanie. "But promise me you'll let me read it first." And me," Stephanie piped up. "But it's not done." Jill glanced over at my tiny pencil scribbles. "It will be." I was at home when I finished, having filled every available piece of paper of that spiral notebook with penciled paragraphs. When I numbered the pages, which made it look like a real book, the last page had an impressive-looking 104 on the top right corner. "Wow," I said. "I wrote a novel." I closed the notebook. I wonder if it's any good. I had no idea if it was, since it felt too much like a diary in fiction form, and therefore too private. What if the story was bad? What if it sounded stupid? I didn't want to show it to anyone, but I promised Jill and Stephanie I would. So I did. "Where's Stephanie?" I asked at lunchtime. Jill shrugged. She handed back the notebook that I gave her in homeroom. "That was fast," I said. "I read fast." She pointed at the notebook with her fork full of chicken fried steak. "The story's pretty good, especially the main character. Dana, you use a lot of big words." "Is that bad?" "Not too bad. I just noticed you use a lot of big words. Vermilion instead of red. Also, you probably have some grammar and spelling mistakes in there, but I don't want to fix them." "Why? You want to do my homework for me?" "No." "Well, there you go." I sighed and turned when Stephanie arrived. "Hi, guys," she said. "Raphael's done," Jill announced. "Really?" she said down her tray. "Can I see it?" I gave it to Stephanie, and she admired the cover. "You even made a book cover." She flipped through the pages. "Is it okay if I bring this home with me?" I hesitated. "It's my only copy." "You should type this up," Jill said. I might fix the mistakes if it was typed up." "But I don't have a typewriter." I couldn't help whining. "I don't even know how." "Oh, I can," Stephanie said. "I mean, my mom can. She has a typewriter. I can ask her. You sure? I asked. Sure, it's no problem. Well, okay, I smiled. Thanks. Every time I saw Stephanie, I asked, is your mom done yet? And Stephanie replied, not yet, but she'll be done soon. As the Christmas holidays loomed near, I grew anxious, asking, is your mom done yet? And Stephanie replied, she's been busy, but she should be done after Christmas. My second Christmas in Texas was not full of happy holidays, as I worried about my little novel. When the school resumed in January, I looked for Stephanie, but she was gone. Where's Stephanie? I asked when I saw Jill before our PE class. You don't know? Her parents got a divorce. Stephanie and her mom moved away. I suddenly felt sick. That same empty, achy feeling of grief and panic that I last felt 2 years ago in the Mommy Dearest hotel room hit me. My book, my very first book that had so much of me in it, was gone forever. You okay? No, I said. No. Where are you going? Jill asked as I started to walk away. Are you going to the nurse's office? Yes. Do you want me to go with you? No. I waved back as I pushed my way through the Salmon Run throng of middle schoolers as they rushed between classes. You've been absent a lot already. I'll be okay. Of course I lied. I knew that I couldn't roam the halls once the bell rang, and I couldn't go home without getting into trouble with either the school attendance office or my parents. So I went to the library. Since some students were already there, I didn't look too out of place as I found an empty corner table and sat down. As I sat there, the panicky grief ache turned into a hot-headed dizziness as my sadness turned into something else. I was mad. I was teeth-grinding, fist-clenching mad, and if anyone had spoken to me at that moment, I might have lost my mind. Desperate to prevent that, I looked around and saw a display of 3 paperback books on top of the middle height stacks near me. The cover of one of them impressed me, of a flying winged centaur, except the wings were the centaur's arms, with a red-eyed, dour-wrinkled green face in a blue bubble below the centaur. The title was A Wrinkle in Time. When I walked closer, I saw the author's name, Madeleine L'Engle, and that she was the author of the other 2 books, A Wind in the Door and A Swiftly Tilting Planet. I chose the book with the striking centaur cover and returned to my table. For the next 45 minutes, Angry Meg, Brilliant Charles Wallace, Reasonable Calvin, and the odd trio of Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Witch took me away from my sorrow and my anger. When the bell rang, I grabbed the other 2 books along with the one I was reading, grabbed my backpack, and checked out all 3 from the library. I no longer felt angry or sad, but my head still felt achy and hot. By the end of the next school day, I got sent to the nurse's office with a fever and a small rash. After Mom took me to a Navy doctor on base, she quarantined me in my bedroom, made Wendy sleep on the couch, warned Eric and Cheryl not to bother me, and admonished me not to scratch at my itchy spots. For the next 2 weeks, chicken pox kept me away from school and most of my family, but L'Engle's 3 novels kept me company. I read and reread them as I endured the rash that turned into blisters that popped open, crusted over, and then turned into scabs. Even when most of the rash started to heal in the 2nd week, a couple of areas got infected. This led to another doctor's visit, smelly ointments, and thick bandages on my shins. I felt ugly and awful. But the books, as that excerpt of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in Cricket did 2 years ago, made me forget all that. When I was cleared to return to school, I was reluctant to return the books, even though they were overdue. Of course I did. However, one wonders what the librarians did with those chickenpox exposed books. But when my 12th birthday was near and Ma and Pa asked me what I wanted for my gifts, I said, 3 books by Madeleine L'Engle. That's all? Pa asked. That's what I want. While Mom and Pa gave me other things as gifts, I have no memory of them. However, I will always remember when Mom gave me cash from her babysitting crocheting. I went to a local generic bookstore called Century Books in Forum 303 Mall, a shopping mall that was later demolished in 2007. Marched straight to the children's book section and bought the 3 books that were my companion for those 2 long, lonely, and itchy weeks. I still have them today. Are you going to write another book? Jill asked me when I came back to school after the chickenpox scabs had healed up, leaving white, silvery scars. I don't know, I said. It's too hard. Jill gave me a withering look. Stop complaining about that first one. The first one's always practice anyways. You'll write again, and the second one will be better. How do you know? She shrugged. I know you. You're a writer. She frowned at her school lunch Frito pie. As it turned out, she was both right and wrong. I did start writing again in the summer of 1984 as a way to stave off summer boredom and escape from my younger siblings and my chore-finding mom. I wrote in a new spiral notebook as my number 2 pencil again wrote out sentences and paragraphs in neat, legible cursive, front and back of each sheet. I wish I remembered what exactly it was about, but all I can recall is a young teen girl named Charlie Harris, her friends, and their club that solved mysteries, kind of like an all-girl 3 investigators. I have no memory of plot or dialogue other than the phrase frog oolong. More on why I remember that later. What I do remember, as clear and as sharp as cut crystal, was learning just how little I knew good writing was. I learned that in 1985, the year my personal life went to hell, while I succeeded like gangbusters in school.